Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Seventh Rule Deep Dive. It's the Deep Space Nine Deep Dive with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello.
All right, here it comes. I checked out the pronunciation. The top pronunciation is Babel, but for our purposes, we're going with Babel. I like the techno Babel thing. I think that's brilliant. Here are the trivioids of the week. Boy, are they fun. Captain Jaheel White has a shipment of Tommen Sashir waiting to be delivered to Largo 5. Major Kira asks for the star charts for the Argosian sector, but the Glycine sector comes up instead. Commander Sisko has a problem with his Ractigino. That was a guess, by the way. I don't think they said Ractigino, but we know he likes Ractigino. O'Brien takes his coffee black, double sweet. That should be a trivia question. Keiko is quite fond of the lad. Chief O'Brien has a case of Dathonitis. That is a Darmok reference. Next Generation episode. Deep Space Nine is under quarantine lockdown, except for Quark's bar. Dibaridium core is for man, why do I do this to myself? I can't even, there are some serious technical. Dibaridium core for a power source has got to be Cardassian technology. Quark pretends to be sick to communicate. This virus is something Deacon Elig might have thought up. Quark plays Dabo by himself. Odo doesn't know how to gamble. And Quark served on a Ferengi freighter for 8 years. All right, that was a mouthful. So
I told you the words in this. This is the most Babel, techno Babel we've had so far. When you talk about the science and also the Kira explaining the technology behind the thing that was making this biological virus inside of the Replimat, all of that stuff was very difficult to word out. I'm sure it took more time than usual.
And then on top of that, the fact that all of you guys also got real words put in nonsensical sentences. Right. You guys probably are like, okay, this is week 4, week 5 of this show. I don't know if I'm going to be able to if this is what it's going to be like, this is crazy. I need a raise, man. This is crazy.
Yes. All of those difficult techno babble on top of words that don't make sense in no kind of order that you would have to memorize precisely to how the script wrote it. So, this is an O'Brien must suffer. This is pretty much everyone must suffer.
Yeah. So this interesting celebrity guest we've got here. There was a nurse that was taking care of you and the others, if you'll recall. Her name was Nurse Jabara. Nurse Jabara is played by an actress called Anne Gillespie. Now, Anne Gillespie was in some shows like Judging Amy, Gilmore Girls, Diagnosis Murder, ER, Seventh Heaven. People are like, okay, get to it. She also played Nurse Jabara in 4 Deep Space Nine episodes. So that's cool. This is the first of the 4. So look forward to seeing more of her. But she also played Kelly's mom on Beverly Hills 90210. So
there
for everybody out there that's like, wait a minute, isn't that Kelly's mom? Yep. That's Kelly's mom.
I remember Nurse Jabara, or the actress, the woman who played her. And people don't know this, but her first name was Kareem Abdul.
Everybody knew that. She looks so much like her dad. she was the spitting image of her dad. She was a little taller, though.
But no, I don't remember being in this episode. Mm-hmm. But when I did see myself, because I actually wrote myself down as a NAB when they first mentioned me, so I said, "Oh, okay, I'm a NAB."
That's funny. Real quick, I do want to say, everybody, here's a piece of trivia for you. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, what was his original name? The answer coming in 5 seconds while you guess. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, what was his original name? Do you know, Cirroc?
Yeah.
Nice. And that name is, correct me if I'm wrong then, Lou Alcindor. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. Yep. What a relief. I'd feel pretty dumb if I said that and you'd be like, no, Ryan, actually, that's totally wrong.
It's Lou Alcindor, yeah.
Anyway.
If I'm not mistaken, he only lost one game in college for 3 years that he was there, if I'm not mistaken. But
played for the Bucks too, I think, initially.
He did.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, this has been basketball talk, but back to the goods.
Yeah, back to Techno Babel. I want to say one thing I observed about this episode was that Alexander Siddig is excellent at the medical stuff. Now, I've heard you say that LaForge, LeVar Burton as Geordi is one of the best at delivering the techno babble when it comes to like space talk, spaceship.
He's the best I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to give Alexander Siddig his props at the medical stuff because he rips that stuff off so clean. Like he is a doctor. It's like he really is a doctor, and the way he rips it off, the connotations and the fluctuations in his voice is like he knows what he's talking about. And I know for a fact he doesn't.
you know for a fact he is not an MD.
I know for a fact he has no idea how all of that stuff that he said worked. But he said it so good and so like from a stance of authority and just of knowing that I was like, wow, you got to give this guy credit because he's just ripping off this medical stuff like he went to med school, and he's just memorizing lines, and he's just so good at delivering those lines. Like he knows what he's talking about. So I thought that was another thing.
And also on that subject, shout out to the people that don't usually get credit for those kind of things. The science advisors, the medical advisors that are not only advising the writers on how to do it, but they're advising the writers, the script supervisor, and the actors on how to pronounce it. Because you are tying the actors' hands behind their backs if you're putting out words that are difficult to pronounce or that are made up, unless you are there coaching them on how to pronounce it so that they don't, that's one less thing they have to worry about in an episode where there's clearly a lot of things to worry about with their speech. So whomever did that, shout out to them, because that obviously makes a big difference, because then Sid can show off his acting chops and impress us all without mispronouncing some made-up techno babble or whatever it is. But yeah, that's a team effort.
Yeah. And I also think that I wanted to say a little bit about Babel because I don't know if everybody knows. We kind of assume things sometimes if we don't really get into it. But just as an origin of the word Babel and what it refers to for those people that don't, the word Babel is a biblical reference. It's a term that comes from the Old Testament, and it refers to the Tower of Babel that was built in ancient Babylon by a fellow by the name of Nimrod. And that's the biblical story of Babel. Now, the way it goes is they were trying to build this structure into the heavens, and God didn't want this to be done. So, as punishment, God gave languages out and separated the ability for all of these people to talk in the same language so that they wouldn't be able to get together and build a structure into the heavens. And that's the narrative, the allegory behind the Tower of Babel. It's essentially the biblical way of explaining the origin of languages and how they are and why languages are different. And it also explains essentially how if people are not able to communicate with each other, then they no longer have power. And that's essentially the overall mythology behind the story. Without the ability to communicate with each other, you won't be able to get together and produce whatever it is that you're trying to produce. And so God removes that ability by making everyone speak different languages. And so they would sound to each other the same way we sounded to each other in this episode,
Yeah.
Which is foreign, right? You wouldn't understand what the person is saying, even if they were speaking a completely different language. So, and the reason I bring that up is because it is consistent with my original premise that a lot of the Deep Space Nine story is biblically based,
Totally.
and then Michael Piller and Rick Berman, uh, specifically Michael Piller, had a lot of uh, biblical inserts that he wanted to make sure they covered along the line of this show. And I felt like they have done that. I mean, you start with the emissary, so you already start with that frame of mind, like putting people in the space of religious iconography. And then you continue it with episode titles like this, where you have an episode titled Babel or Babel, essentially um, highlighting the fact that, yes, you are borrowing certain biblical storylines, mythology, and entomology. So,
yeah, I remember when you first made that connection, that all three Siskos had biblical names. That was really interesting.
right.
Jacob, Joseph, and Benjamin. And your sister was Jesus, I believe. Um, no, but that's really interesting. And I do remember hearing that story about Babel. And that is it is an interesting one because that's just kind of a way of dividing people, divide and conquer, basically, right?
Yeah.
Well, I have a big question, and I'm trying to think if I want to ask it right. Okay, let's just ask it right now. Why did they just can write it down? like, like
Yeah, I
why
thought the
not?
same thing.
Like or nod? Because I still couldn't figure out, and this will be a good question for the free for all. I couldn't figure out if the sick people could understand the non-sick people. We know that the non-sick people couldn't understand them. Because we did get a hint when Sisko said, when he talked over the intercom and said, to anybody that can understand me, that tells us that they can't understand him if they're sick. But there were other reactions from the sick people that seemed like they could understand them, like when the nurse was talking to Kira when she's already sick and he says something and she kind of like nods or sighs in acknowledgement. So I just couldn't figure it out. But yeah, couldn't they just write it down? I don't know.
Yeah, I was in an impression that even if you were sick and you couldn't verbally say what you wanted to say, that you could still understand what somebody else was saying.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
it felt like they were responding to cues. I mean, at some point, Cisco's telling Jake, "I'm not going to lose you. I'm going to make sure," and it seems like Jake is listening and understanding what he's saying, right? And even with O'Brien when he's being tested in the medical, with Dr. Bashir kind of running tests on him, and he's talking. If you if you didn't understand what they were saying, you wouldn't even know why they were taking you to the
Right.
med bay,
Right.
right?
So that's why it seemed like they could understand them. But again, when Cisco said to anybody that can understand me, I was like, oh, I guess they can't. And then, but then,
Yeah.
but then the
I think
question of
maybe
whether
that
they could
was
write it
yeah,
down,
yeah.
maybe their brain doesn't, maybe they would be writing down the nonsensical words too if they tried to
I think
write it.
yeah, and as a matter of fact, I'm sure of that. There's no way for them to um, write it down. And the reason I say that is because if I'm not mistaken, when Bashir first caught the symptoms of his Babel virus, he was looking at a computer screen that was saying something. And I believe what they were trying to convey was that it was the words he was reading were out of
Mm,
order and
okay.
nonsensical.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay,
because
that
when
all
I
makes
looked,
sense.
I kind of looked at the computer screen, and it didn't make any sense what was being
Then that would
displayed
all
on
be
this computer screen.
consistent, and that would all make sense to me in that regard, because they did say something like that, to where in the brain, what you are seeing here is triggering a different word. So whether you're triggering it, auditorily or verbally or written or whatever it is, you're getting a different word. But let's take another quick break in this fun deep dive. When we come back in just a second, we'll have Malissa Longo joining us. And we should pretend like we don't understand a word she's saying and just be like, tree forgot juicy fruits, and then she'll be like, I hate you guys, and leave.
But look, Ryan, it wasn't easy to do that, right?
No, it's
It's
hard
not.
because you have to think about it.
Yeah,
That's why they had to have those lines memorized, because otherwise
yeah,
you're
it's
just
not.
focusing on thinking about it.
Yeah, because you're thinking, what's the next word I'm going to say, right? Suitcase, beer, chair.
Right,
Like you
because
have to think of the words.
humans naturally make connections. So it's counterintuitive for us to make words that aren't connected. Kind of like if a singer
Right.
uh, tries to sing out of tune, it's actually a really hard thing to do because we've practiced a long time to sing in tune. So
Yeah.
you can't even fake singing out of tune or in a fucked up way.
It's difficult to come
Mhm.
up. You'd have to memorize the script. It's difficult to come up on the spot with nonsensical stuff, trying to say it like you're saying something.
Exactly. Anyway,
Yeah.
mystery solved. We'll be right back with Malissa Longo on the Seventh Rule Deep Space Nine Deep Dive.